All right, welcome back. So let's get started by talking about project design and the relationship between your data and your questions. All right, so I couldn't resist. Sorry. Which comes first, your data or your questions? Right, that's our chicken or our egg. All right, so whichever one you decide comes first has implications, and that's the point of asking that question, right? So if you have your data come first and you're like, oh my goodness, I found this amazing data set and I want to go and ask questions of it, then what you're doing is something that's exploratory. It's experimental. It's going out, it's digging, it's looking for some sort of insight to come from your data. This method introduces bias, right? And there may not be a question that it answers. So saying, oh, I'm going to let the question come from the data is a method that inherently introduces this notion of bias, that whatever's the data is going to speak to me, right? If your question comes first, it's going to be more directed, it's going to be much more focused, and it's going to be grounded in some sort of theory. Now, theories can be just as biased as anything else. Do not get me wrong. But what it means is that it's going to be grounded in something that's justifiable and defensible and at least logical to hopefully insulate us from that to a certain degree. Now, it's not going to ameliorate the effects completely, but it is going to allow us to say, I chose X because of Y. And therefore continue to interrogate our decisions and our thinking. Problem with a question-oriented project design is that there may not be data available. Now, if you're doing a dissertation or if you have some massive research project with lots of funding, that might not be an issue, right? Because if the data is not available, you can go out and you can create the data. But for the most part, for most of us, we need to work with data that's already there. So we're going to need to do some combination of the two. What I propose for you for the semester is an iteration, right? So start with your topic. Start with something that you're interested in. And it can be super broad, right? Like, I am interested in elections in the United States. Okay, go out and start looking for data sets around elections. What kind of data would you need to answer questions about your topic? From your data, start asking, what questions can you answer? So what variables are in the data that present you questions that are answerable? Do those questions still relate to your topic? If they still relate to your topic, continue on. If not, go back. You might need to revise your topic. And finally, what story can you tell? Is there a story there? And if there's no story there, you may need to go and start the cycle again. Thinking about your topic, refining it, looking for the data that you're going to need to address your topic, having questions that come out of the data, thinking again, like sanity checking, do the questions address the topic, and then thinking about the story that you can tell, right? So you may end up through the course of the semester going through this iterative process multiple times. Okay? All right, so let's talk about what makes a good topic. So a good topic is something that's intriguing. And all that really means is something that you're interested in. If you're not interested in it, you're not going to be able to get anybody else interested in it either. So a good topic is intriguing. It's grounded in something, right? So it's grounded in experience. You know, every time I ride the R train, it is very late, right? So that could prompt me to look at the timeliness of trains in some period of time, right? It's not necessarily theoretically driven, but it is driven by my experience, and I want to validate my experience. It could be driven by theory. You know, I read this theory and I want to see if it's accurate. It could be driven by your own research. If you are, interested in a particular topic, like, I don't even know, propagating plants, and you have been researching propagating plants for however long, you may want to ground your project in your own research. Likewise, it could be grounded in the media. You've heard a lot about election fraud and all of this and want to go out and investigate the prevalence of election fraud. Right? Yeah, another element of a good topic is that the outcome would be meaningful. We would care, right? Like we would care somehow. And it's actually up to you, the researcher, to tell us why this matters, why it's intriguing, what it's grounded in, like what is the inspiration for the project, and knowing the answer, would that be meaningful? And if so, what's at stake, right? By knowing this thing about election fraud, what's at stake? Why do we care? What is going to be that, like, if we find that there is election fraud or if there isn't election fraud, why is that going to matter to anyone? Okay, so we have a checklist for good topics. What about good data? So good data, the best data, is relevant to your topic. Now, your topic may have to change to meet your data, but good data is going to be relevant to your topic. It's going to be specific, so it can be constrained or constrainable. So when you are looking for data sets, make sure that you are able to recover some details about how it was collected. What were the parameters? What was the sample? If they start talking about population, be skeptical because no one is able to measure the entire population. They're going to have to measure some sort of sample. There should be a time bound on it. You should know when this data was collected and what time period is represented in the data. Now, those things are actually different. So if I go to Twitter and I get a Twitter stream about Bernie Sanders' mittens, right? So I'm looking at this Twitter stream, I'm pulling in the data on this date. Today happens to be January 24th. But most of the posts on Twitter are going to be from earlier in the week. So earlier in January, right? Each one of those tweets is going to be dated. So the data will have a date, but also the day that I'm pulling it will have a date. Now, obviously, you're not always going to have both of those timestamps, but you need to know when the data was created and what time period it was pulled from. Good data is quantifiable. So if you are really interested in text, in order to turn a text into data, you need to do some sort of text analysis. So whether that's looking at words, if that's looking at topics, if that's looking at chapters, it doesn't matter, but it needs to be quantifiable in some way. And you need to be able to detail how it's quantifiable. And finally, good data is organized. There's not lots of missing things. There's not, messy data is hard to work with. Sometimes you get a lot out of messy data, especially if you collected it yourself. But data that is not organized or is very messy is not actually good data. And it's going to take a lot of work for you to make it into good data. That said, I would say about 80% of the work of data science or data analytics or any of that field is just cleaning your data, because most data is not super clean. Okay. Good research questions for quantitative projects are specific. So something that you have constrained, you're not trying to study the whole world, you're trying to study something specific. They're measurable. It's not a yes or a no. It's not something that you give this like qualitative philosophical answer to, but it's something that you can actually measure. They're answerable. Again, not a philosophical discussion about what is truth or, how can I tell if someone is lying? That is not answerable, right? They're relevant. They're relevant to the topic and relevant to the thing that you're trying to study. So there's a direct relationship between your topic, your research question, and your data set. They're non-biased, so they're not begging the question or assuming the answer, right? So they're open-ended, willing to entertain any of a series of outcomes. And finally, they're open-ended, so it's not just a yes or no, true or false binary distinction. You want something that's open-ended. Okay. So let's go on and look at a sample topic. Okay. So our topic, we want to know about political polarization in the United States. Many people state that it's at an all-time high. We are interested in validating if this is true, and if it is, understanding its impact on society. We are going to focus on immigration because it's a major debate right now, and gun control because there were record numbers of gun deaths last year. I've been teaching this in this way since 2015, posing this exact same question. And every year I pose it, people still state that political polarization is at an all-time high. Immigration is a major debate, and there were record numbers of gun deaths last year, every year. So with that, let us continue. All right, so our research question. This is our topic, and now we want to ask a research question that is specific, measurable, answerable, relevant, non-biased, and open-ended. Okay, so are people's views about politically charged issues shaped by the media they consume? Okay, this is relevant to our topic, but it has some major problems. Okay, so the first one that you may have noticed is that it is deeply biased. So we have assumed that the media shapes the views. So we have assumed that there's a causative effect. There's more, which goes beyond the correlation. So we need to reshape this to have it be about the relationship between them, not that the media is shaping the views, because we all know and we can all accept that many of us have views that we have, and therefore we seek out media that confirms those views, right? So it's not just that media shapes our views, it's that our views shape the media that we're consuming as well. The second problem with this is that it's not open-ended. You can answer this with a yes or a no. You can say, yes, people's views are shaped by the media they consume, period. It's also not very specific. So what media? How often, about what topics, what politically charged issues. It's also not very measurable because politically charged issues is very amorphous. What issues are we going to talk about, right? Okay, so let's take another stab at this, right? So how do people's views about politically charged issues relate to the media they consume? Okay, it's not binary anymore, it's open-ended. The bigger shift that we see here is that we've changed shaped by to relate to. And in this way, we have made it less biased. So we're not assuming that the media shapes the views. Rather, we're saying, is there a relationship here? And, what is that relationship? Okay. But I think we can still do better because this is still super open-ended, hard to measure, and not terribly answerable. Let's take another stab at it. Okay. How do people's views about immigration and gun control relate to the newspapers they consume? Okay, so we've gotten more specific. We've said, okay, we're going to talk only about newspapers, and we're going to talk about these two topics, right? These two politically charged issues. Okay, so we're making some progress. So let's take one more stab at it. And our stab is this. Is there a relationship between the degree of political polarization of the newspapers people consume and the degree of polarization of their views on immigration and gun control? Right. So here we are actually asking about political polarization. We've stated the thing that we're going to measure, degree of political polarization and degree of political polarization of their views of these two specific issues. So here it's specific. It's about political polarization of newspapers and political polarization of their views. It's measurable because we're measuring the degree of that polarization. It's answerable. We can collect data about people's views and about the polarization of their media. and the frequency with which they read the media. It's relevant to our topic. We've addressed our topic actually far more specifically by talking about the polarization not only of the views but also of the newspapers. It's non-biased. We haven't assumed that that relationship goes one way or another. It is not open-ended. So for this, we would have to ask a follow-up question. But otherwise, it meets all of our criteria for being a good research question. Okay? When we come back, we're going to talk about the difference between research questions and hypotheses, and a little bit about how to reach an audience and find the story once you have posed your research question. All right, I'll see you in the next video. All right, take care. Bye-bye.